Just a few weeks ago, the Central Park Zoo in New York City was vandalized by an underground group in the animal rights movement. This is the first time this has happened in the United States in a very long time, and when this does happen, it's pretty common for the FBI to make their visits, knock on doors, FBI, open up! Try and solve the crime. We obviously don't want that to happen, so what better time than now than to talk about how to deal with the FBI. Before we get into the weeds, let's get a few things straight. One, liberating animals from places of abuse, vandalizing buildings, these are crimes. And unfortunately, here in the United States, the FBI considers some of these crimes domestic terrorism. Two, you have the right to remain silent. If there's only one thing that you take away from this video, let it be that. If you're ever confronted by the feds, just keep your mouth shut. And under no circumstances do you ever give information about other activists. If this happens, it is a lifetime ban. This is considered snitching. Activists that cooperate with the feds, that cooperate with law enforcement are not welcome back. All the information that I'm going to be providing is not legal advice, but rather my lived experience as an activist. I've been doing this since around 2005, and I'm able to speak about this subject more candidly than most because in 2015, I was indicted and convicted under the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act.
On Friday, the government unveiled federal terrorism charges against two animal rights activists accused of helping to free minks and foxes from fur farms in rural Illinois.
I was looking at about 10 years in prison. The crime was liberating 2,000 animals from a fur farm in Morris, Illinois, which resulted in the closure of the farm. And because of this, I've had a lot of experience dealing with the feds. And to make something real clear, when you are an animal rights activist, and if you support animal liberation, and when I say that, I mean breaking into facilities and liberating animals so that they are not going to be killed for fur or vivisection or whatever, then you support crime. You support something that the FBI considers domestic terrorism. And this makes the FBI, this makes law enforcement our natural enemies in reality. The FBI are not our friends. We do not talk to them. We do not deal with them. The only thing that will come of dealing with the FBI is them getting information to try and use it against our community to solve these crimes, to put people in prison. So this may sound scary and intimidating, and quite frankly, it a little bit is, but that is what the goal of the FBI is in this scenario. Like, the reason they have the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act that has these serious punishments is because they want to scare us out of taking effective action for animals. And it's our job as activists to kill that cop in our head, to not allow them to control what we do because of the threat of these laws that almost are never enforced. You know, I'm one of the very few people that have ever been indicted under the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, and there have been hundreds and hundreds of actions that have happened where nobody gets convicted whatsoever. So it's our job to overcome that fear and not allow it to hold us back from taking effective action for animals. And I know a lot of people get concerned about like their street actions, like say, protests and whatnot. And in my experience, I can tell you the FBI does not care about what we're doing at an LVMH store. They don't care about our yellow and red actions where, we go and invade a store and maybe a person or two gets arrested or something. Like, this is beneath the FBI. What they're really concerned about is activists taking the law into their own hands, where they're breaking into fur farms, breaking into vivisection labs, and releasing animals and doing what needs to be done to make sure these animals are not harmed by these facilities. All right, so to help you understand how you might have to deal with the FBI, I'm just going to share one of my experiences dealing with them. So in 2015, I was interrogated by the FBI, and I can tell you firsthand that it's extremely nerve-wracking. The way it went down was, it was the 2015 Animal Rights Conference in Los Angeles, California. I was hosting a fundraiser for an animal rights group that I was a part of called the Bunny Alliance. We were right about to go on a month or two long tour across the United States called the Fight or Flight Tour. We were targeting airliners, demanding that they stop shipping primates to laboratories. It was part of the Gateway to Hell campaign, which maybe we can talk on this channel sometime later about. But basically, I was sitting outside of the Veggie Grill, and I was on the phone with another activist. And all of a sudden, I noticed that there's about 20 agents walking towards my way. Pretty much all of them had like AR-15s and things around their neck. They walk up and they immediately just grab the phone out of my hand. Thankfully, I had enough time to tell the activist, hey, call my lawyer. I'm being arrested right now. So they take the phone, they grab me, and they throw me in the back of a black unmarked vehicle. When I'm inside the vehicle, the only things that I say to the feds is, why am I being detained and when do I get to speak to a lawyer? Nothing else was stated to them whatsoever. They take me to the Los Angeles FBI office where they put me into an interrogation room. And in there's a metal bench that basically I have my ankle handcuffed to. And they pretty much took turns trying to interrogate me, and they did a very like cliche good cop, bad cop thing. The bad cop went first, and he comes in and pretty quickly tells me, you're in very serious trouble. He tells me that I'm looking at life in prison. Still at this time, he's not explicitly telling me what the crime was for, but he did say that it was under the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act. But he was intentionally not telling me like, oh, this was for raiding the Morris mink farm or anything like that, because what he wants is for me to give him additional information that he doesn't already have. And to get this information, he's intentionally trying to be intimidating. He's slamming his hands on the table. He's raising his voice. He's repeatedly saying that I'm going to do life in prison, so on and so forth. And as he's doing this, the only thing that I kept asking him was, when do I get a phone call? When do I get to speak to a lawyer? Legally, the feds were supposed to stop interrogating me after I asked for my lawyer. But nevertheless, they proceeded for the next 5 hours asking me questions and taking rotations with different FBI agents, some of them being nice, some of them being very mean, try and get me to share information with them. But I just sat there smiling back at frustrated FBI agents, not getting any information. And I distinctly remember my face muscles being sore at the end of all of that because I sat there for so many hours, just tense and not saying a word. So this is obviously an extreme example that pretty much basically nobody will encounter, but there are some lessons that I want to point out from this experience. So some of the lessons from my interrogation with the FBI is that you can and must remain silent. Sharing any information with the FBI whatsoever, no matter how mundane it may seem, can be used against the community to get indictments. Another takeaway from the situation in the interrogation room is oftentimes when you're being interrogated, you are not the only target in the situation. In my interrogation, most of the questions that they were asking me were actually not about me. Most of the questions were about people that they suspected I was involved with in direct action, and they were trying to use me to get information from them. Another takeaway from my interrogation is that the FBI are trained manipulators and they're allowed to lie to you. The thing that I heard repeated over and over again was that I was going to spend life in prison. Here I am in 2025. We're making a YouTube video about this. It's very clear that that didn't happen. Another thing to keep in mind, the FBI sucks at investigations. When they're making their rounds, knocking on doors, it's not because they have the crime solved. It's quite the opposite. They don't have the crime solved. If the crime was solved, there'd be indictments handed out. People be putting in handcuffs. But when they're knocking on doors, it's because they're relying on you to give them information to help them solve the crime. So it's our duty as activists that support animal liberation, that support people that go out there and put a mask on and liberate animals from fur farms. It's our duty as above ground activists to protect those that work underground by simply keeping our mouths shut and not providing the information and details that might help them solve this crime. When you look at the history of activists that have gotten in trouble working with the Animal Liberation Front or underground in general, it's almost always because of some stupid mistake or activists sharing information with the feds. It's very, very rarely that the FBI does some amazing investigation and solves the crime through their investigative work. So just to give a few examples of how activists have gotten caught in the past for doing underground actions, is there was a couple of activists in Utah that got caught for ALF actions, but it wasn't because the FBI did a great job at hunting them down. It was because they brought their cell phones with them to the crime. They also dropped their car keys in the crime, which made it pretty easy to figure out who they are. For those that don't know, cell phones are tracked all over the place in real time. They can triangulate them and figure out you were there. So if you ever want to do something that you don't want the feds knowing about, maybe don't bring your cell phone. So, this one's kind of on the activists, and not to blame them, but just to make the point here, it didn't exactly take amazing investigative work to figure that one out. Another one that happened, there was an activist that spent many years in prison. And this one, they actually bragged about doing the crime on Facebook. So they literally told the internet and the feds themselves, unknowing that they'd be tracked down that way. So again, not a situation where the FBI were doing amazing investigative work, but rather just activists being sloppy because they didn't have the information to know how to get away with the crime. If you are someone that ever does get visited by the FBI, don't be shy about it. The best thing you can do if you're contacted by the FBI is let the community know. The only reason that I knew that I was on the terrorist watch list prior to my indictment was because I constantly had people reaching out to me saying, hey, Tyler, the FBI came by our house and they were asking about you. And in fact, like, this would happen all the time because in Los Angeles, there used to be a lot of crimes going on during the Shack campaign. Basically, every time somebody would have a brick thrown through their window or spray paint on their house or anything like this, the FBI would make their rounds. And my name was one of a handful of names that would constantly be brought up. And if the activists that were being visited never brought it to me and to the community, then it would have been hard to know what they were doing. And like the information and the questions that the FBI ask are indicators of what they're investigating and what they're thinking. If you are ever visited by the FBI, sound the alarms. If you want, you're always welcome to email us at action@caftusa.org. We'll put out a bulletin to make sure everyone knows and with a reminder of how to deal with the FBI. So there are only 4 things that you should say to law enforcement unless you're a police liaison at a protest. Am I free to leave? I'm going to remain silent. I want a lawyer. I do not consent to a search. And you should never, ever say anything about another activist. So those willing to take underground action for animals are literally risking their freedom for a cause that we all claim to care so much about. It's our obligation and our duty as above ground activists that don't take underground action to not talk to the feds, to not talk to law enforcement, to not provide them with any information that might lead and assist them in finding these activists. That is the least that we can do. Simply keep your mouth shut. Please let us know what you think about this format and content. This is not the type of content that we're going to be having on here frequently, to be honest. We want to stick to more topics that pertain to legal street protests and all of that. But because of the ALF action that just happened in New York City, we felt obligated to touch on this topic because who knows? Maybe people are unaware that they're not supposed to talk to the feds. Maybe they didn't know that if they run their mouth about what they were doing and all of that, that it could result in them being banned from coming back to the animal rights movement. So we just wanted to get out there and make sure we provide that information. So lastly, while we're on the topic of repression, there were just a handful of activists that were arrested in Europe for chalking at an LVMH Target. There's a fundraiser going on for them right now. We will put a link to this in the description of this video. That way, if you have the funds to do so, you can help them out. And I think that's pretty much it. If you're contacted by the FBI, don't talk to them.